I'm gonna go, give me just 1 second to resize this. Okay, brilliant. So I see there are more people coming in, so we'll start. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining on a Sunday morning. Welcome to today's session. My name is Emily Adrianova, and I'm a board member of TESOL-SPAIN. On behalf of TESOL-SPAIN, I'd like to welcome you to Karen McGhie session on integrating phonics and spelling with teenage learners. Just to check that you're in the right room. I'll be the moderator for the session, so please use the chat box function or the Q&A function if you have any questions or any problems with sound. Excuse me, you can find both of these in the top right corner of your screen, although you probably know from yesterday, just to make sure if there are any newcomers. Bear in mind that if you use full screen, you won't be able to see the chat. So if you want to use the chat or the Q&A, just exit your full screen mode. And if you have any tech problems, just send us a message, okay? So she doesn't need an introduction, but I'd like to introduce Karen briefly. She's the head of teacher training and development and has a degree in French with TESOL from the University of Exeter. She's taught English since 2014 and completed the Trinity Dip TESOL in 2016. Before coming to live in San Sebastian, she lived and worked in Logroño and her hometown of London. She's also a CELTA tutor and presenter. So without further ado, Karen, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, everyone. It's weird not to see you all in person. However, we can still do this, which is good. So put anything you want in the chat and we'll have a look at it at the end. And also you'll have time for any questions at the end. I'm going to speak quite a lot because obviously I like speaking. And if you have any burning questions at the end, then I'm going to ask you to email me too. And also the PDF of the talk will be available. So if you feel like there's lots of information and you want to write things down, don't worry, you can email me and I'll send you the PDF of the whole talk so you have it and you can do whatever you want with it. As Emily said, I'm the head of teacher training and development at London School of Languages in San Sebastian, Spain. I see some people in the participants box that I know. So hi everyone, happy Sunday morning. So there's 3 of us on the team. There's me in the middle, Inigo and Alex. Alex is actually giving a talk right now on another one of these channels. And the 3 of us form the teacher training team. We give CELTA talks, we have the CELTA course, we give talks, we do in-house training, and we're also, very importantly, all teachers. So we know a little bit about what goes on in the classroom. It's very important. Okay, so why the topic of phonics and teenage learners? So importantly, I think that phonics is very, very, very effective with younger learners. But then I thought to myself, why do we not think about this and consider this much more with our teenage learners? Because ultimately, and as we'll see, they have very similar issues and very similar problems as our younger learners, but all of a sudden, when they get to secondary level, we stop focusing on these phonics issues and we start thinking about other things and automatically assume that they'll have overcome all of those issues that they faced when they were 11, 12, and then at 13, automatically they'll get over it. So I thought to myself, no, they have the same issues. I see them repeatedly, especially in their spelling. And so that's why I wanted to kind of develop this further and think about how you can apply the same techniques that you would use with phonics with younger learners and apply those to teenage learners. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, phonics. What are we going to be talking about? So we're going to be talking about, first of all, what phonics is for some of you who might not know. We're going to be talking about how phonics works. And then we're going to ask the question, is spelling really that difficult? You can start thinking about that now. We're going to think about how spelling can affect other skills. We're going to think about then what issues teenagers have when they spell. Many issues, some of you might be thinking. And then finally, we're going to be looking at ideas and practice that you can do in class with your teenage learners. So something very practical that you can take away from this session and start using in your teenage classes from tomorrow. Yes, guys, tomorrow is Monday. Okay, so first of all, synthetic phonics. Some of you might be aware of this. Some of you might be using this already in your classes, in your primary level classes. For those of you who don't know, synthetic phonics is usually used to teach primary students how to read and write. So it's a system that's introduced in English-speaking countries for native speakers from a younger level. Because the way I learned how to read and write was just look, memorize, repeat, get it wrong, be corrected. But I think maybe kind of like 15, 20 years ago, there was a big change in primary teaching for reading and writing in the UK especially. And synthetic phonics is now the way that you teach students to read and write. And over the course of the years, this has also been adopted into bilingual teaching and also into ELT, which is something that this is what I'm going to be talking about. And it is extremely effective. The reason here being that it's teaching reading and writing on a more often than not principle. And often people say to me, oh, but there are so many things that phonics doesn't cover. Yes, but when you're talking about the more often than not principle, this means that more often than not, you'll get it right. And so that's why it works so well. So some of you might be familiar with this. So this is the Jolly Phonics poster. And Jolly Phonics is just one of the companies, one of the organizations which makes material, and it's actually one of the biggest ones, and it makes very, very good material. Some questionable drawings, I have to say, some questionable kind of design features, but the way that the system that it has and the way that it promotes phonics is excellent. And we use, I think one of the questions from yesterday in the chat was, what material do you use? And with primary learners, Jolly Phonics material is just the best. It's amazing. So if you use that and you supplement that with things that you see in your course books, because primary course books also have phonics elements, you don't need much more than that, apart from your creativity and also willing students. So this is the poster. It's organized into groups, as you can see. So it goes from the top, which is the most frequent letter sounds that students would see, down to the bottom to the least frequent. So it goes in order. So it's in order of frequency and the likelihood that students are of coming across these letters in words. So it's done in a really logical way and the system works well. At the beginning, I was quite reluctant to take on board the idea of teaching phonics because I have long been a super fan of the phonemic chart. Mainly because I've studied at a university, I've done my CELTA, my Delta, and I think to myself, I love the phonemic chart and I like using it in class. And then I think, well, this is something which is, every single word has a phoneme. However, phonics, not every single letter sound matches exactly what you see in a word. So I was a little bit reluctant at first. However, once I started looking at phonics, then I start thinking to myself, okay, this is really good for descriptive pronunciation focus and descriptive phonology. Why? Because you have a word, you show students how to say that word, but you never teach them then how to overcome issues when they come across an unknown word and you're not there. We say, yes, they can look in the dictionary, but teenage learners aren't going to look in a dictionary. Adult learners, yes, they might. But they also have to learn this system of phonemes and learning how to interpret them. Whereas with phonics, it's exactly what you see. Okay, what you see on that poster, for example, is exactly what you have to interpret when you read a word, when you decode a word. So it works extremely well. And so I was little by little more and more convinced by the phonics method. Okay, so what we've got here is a little bit of a summary. So synthetic phonics gives students the tools to master reading, writing, speaking, and listening in a more independent way, making them more confident and competent learners in general. And as I was saying, you can really see the difference with students, especially at the younger levels. What it gives them is a way to overcome issues by themselves and rely less on the teachers. And also rely less on, oh, I'm not sure, so I'm just going to put whatever comes to my mind, or I'm just going to randomly try to work out how to say something. So you're working on this reading, writing, speaking, it's all integrated. And phonics you might think is just speaking, but no, everything is connected. And so what we do here is then try and create these confident and importantly competent learners, because what we want to do is celebrate success. So what we're doing is giving them a chance to succeed, rather than saying to them, oh, this is hard, you're getting this wrong, constantly saying, you know, it's not a losing battle. So we want them to succeed because they know something and they've put those principles into action. And so the success that comes from learning a system such as phonics, synthetic phonics, gives them the chance to succeed and gives them a chance to independently become readers and writers, little by little. Of course, we have the exceptions. Of course, we have our famous tricky words, but these are not the majority. You know, this more often than not means that the students will succeed the majority of the time if they integrate these principles and apply them to new words that they come across. Okay, so how does phonics work? Again, some of you will know this, so it's just going to be handy Sunday morning revision for you. So we have a grapheme. So a grapheme is the symbol used to identify a phoneme. So these are the ones that you saw on the poster. Okay, the grapheme, because graph, we write. So it's what you see written and how this is pronounced. So the sound that it represents. We have a digraph. So you have a grapheme, which is 2 letters. Okay, such as this OA, which in this system is O. And for some of you might know the action as well. Oh, one of my favorites. You have the phoneme, which is the sound unit made by a letter or combination of letters. So here the grapheme, the digraph, and you do have trigraphs. On the poster, trigraphs aren't there because they're often alternative spellings, which we'll look at in a minute. But trigraphs do exist. So for example, IGH, 3 letters, 1 phoneme, 1 sound. Okay, and it's really important for students to understand that even though you have a combination of 3 letters, it still only makes 1 sound. Okay, so a few more things here which are slightly more advanced. So we have alternative spellings. So you've got other sounds made by the same letter combinations. Or so for example, you might have the OA, which we had this O. You can also have OW, which makes the same phoneme. Okay, so it can be O or it can be OW, and we'll see that a bit later. Tricky words. So these are the words that students will always find difficult. Okay, a tricky word is a word that cannot be decoded. Okay, so you can't use the system in any way to decode it. And these are the words that just need to be learned. Or some people call them sight words as well. Consonant blends, common blends which cause problems for students. So consonant blends, for example, like br, fr, str. Okay, and often these consonant blends prove problematic for students when they don't exist in the L1. Initial consonant blends are easier because they're easier to hear and they're also easier to say. Final consonant blends are very, very difficult for students. So we have to also consider that when we're focusing on correction and also introducing these consonant blends. And one of my favorites, magic E. So magic E is, for example, when you add an E to you have the vowel, then you have a consonant, then you have the E at the end of the word, like time. Okay, so you've got Tim when without the E and then time. So it changes the value of the vowel before the consonant. And actually it makes it sound like its letter name. Okay, so you've got the I, okay, and the E makes it sound not like an I, like its phoneme that it has with its grapheme, but it makes it sound like its name. So it's you have the U or the O. So that's a nice way of thinking about it too. Okay, so this means that students are more confident because it works on the principle that if you know the rules of the most frequent patterns in the English language, you'll be able to deal with the majority of words that you encounter. Okay, and this is the principle that I want to also bring into this talk today about teenage learners. Because how well do you think that teenage learners cope with new words that they encounter or words that they know even, but maybe forget about? And this leads me on to this question. Is spelling really that difficult? And I have heard teachers say that English spelling is just difficult and there's nothing we can do about it. And I'm sure that you've maybe uttered these words, not to you, or you've heard people say this, or it's been given to you in a lesson or a lecture or something when you've been studying English. And they might say, English spelling is just difficult, there's nothing we can do about it. Is this true? My question to you, have a think. Is this true? Is this true? Is there nothing we can do about it? Obviously, it's not true. Okay, so the whole concept that English spelling is, oh my God, it's so hard. We can't do anything with it. It's so irregular. Nothing looks as it sounds, blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's not as regular as Spanish pronunciation because not every letter has the same value. It's not always pronounced in the same way. Yes, that's a nice system. However, English does have a system. And that system is reflected in synthetic phonics. So why would we hide this from students and tell them that, oh my gosh, there's these big problems and you're never going to be able to deal with them? So don't say this to your students, because then all they're going to be thinking is, gosh, I'm never going to be able to pronounce anything in English. So it is not, importantly, too difficult to teach in class and too difficult to work on. Okay, so looking now at some research. So there was a study, I know 1970s is a long time ago, but the same words apply. So I got this from David Crystal. He wrote some very nice books on linguistics and on the English language and the development of the English language. If you're very interested in that, I definitely am. So in the 1970s, there was a study published with an analysis of 17,000 words, okay? It found that 84% of the words were spelled according to a regular pattern. Okay, so thinking about this, 84% of the words that students will come across are spelled according to the regular pattern that we have in phonics. Okay, and only 3% were so unpredictable they would have to be learned by heart. So these are our sight words or our tricky words. So taking this into consideration, the whole idea that spelling in English is really, really, really hard actually is not proven in any sense. And he says here, accordingly, the suggestion that English spelling is fundamentally chaotic seems to be nonsense. Okay, and we also have to take on board here that a lot of the time the English spellings and the pronunciation seems to be difficult is when we have lexical borrowing. So when we borrow words from other languages, and it's the reason, for example, that CH in English is quite difficult because we've borrowed a lot of languages from French. So the difference between, for example, chef and chief, sh and a ch, this is difficult because it all has to do with when it was borrowed and the fact that if it was borrowed first, then we retain something and we change it to an English pronunciation. Okay, so all of this often occurs, and this irregularity occurs with lexical borrowing. But in general, a lot of the words that we have borrowed into English language do follow that regular pattern. So it's not chaotic and we can deal with it in class. And what effect does this have on the students that we teach? How would it make them feel? And so I often say that if we say to students that there's no pattern, that there's no way they can get over it, and don't give them ideas, then it's like English spelling and pronunciation is the impossible dream. We're basically saying that it's really, really hard, and they have this fear of failure. And then it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy because they think, God, I can't do this. They start writing something, and often it's put at random because they don't have that integrated system, because we've not let them into the secret that there is a system. And so often what we find with their writing is that even if you think they know a word, they still write it randomly. And it's written maybe 3 or 4 different times in one text of 140 words. And you think, what's going on here? Okay, so because we don't focus on it in class, and because we're like, oh, this is just difficult, and because they haven't, internalized this system, it can make them think that they're always going to get it wrong. So what's the point in trying? And we have to avoid this with teenage learners. Otherwise, it can become a fossilized error, as we probably see with many of our students. So in general, I think this is very true of kind of my time when I was young. And especially, I think some of you, when you've learned English, I guarantee that this was the case for you. Maybe not so much now, especially in primary levels in English-speaking countries, but I'm still not sure in ELT whether this still applies. Okay, so children are rarely taught how to spell. They are told they must learn spellings off by heart, of course, and they are rigorously tested. You know, our typical weekly spelling test in which you get like 2 out of 10 and you think that your life is over. But to learn something by heart doesn't explain what it is you've learned. Okay, so the system, the patterns. In order to understand the spelling system of English, children need to be given reasons for why the spellings are as they are and told about how these spellings relate to the way they pronounce the words. Okay, there is a system, there is a connection. We shouldn't be hiding that from students and making them think that it's too difficult for them to overcome. Okay, so how can our spelling affect other skills? So importantly, speaking, we have a lack of awareness of pronunciation. If we don't know how things are spelled or how a spelling relates to pronunciation, we have a massive lack of awareness of how the two things connect and how what I read on paper translates to how I articulate this from my mouth. And this you see every single day in your classes, not only with primary learners, but also with secondary learners. Listening, what you find is poor sound recognition. And I imagine that you've seen this in, for example, your first certificate classes, where they have the open close for the listening, and they have to listen and they have to write down what they hear. And they know the word, but they just don't know how to write it down, or they've seen the word written down, but they don't know how that sounds. So they've only seen it written. They don't know how it sounds. Therefore, they can't identify it in a listening text. But then you tell them the word or you write it on the board and there's this like, oh, of course. And then they'll say it how they thought it was pronounced. So what you've got here again is a lack of understanding between all of the different skills, how one word is identified within each of these skills. Reading, exactly the same. What do we do when we read? We read aloud in our head. Okay, you might think reading has nothing to do with that, but with reading, what we do is we read and we tell ourselves the story, or we read it aloud in our heads. If we're reading it aloud in our heads incorrectly, that's also going to affect how I hear something, how I say something, because I'm internally fossilizing this incorrect pronunciation. And writing is very obvious to us as teachers. And students also can suffer this embarrassment and lack of confidence. And often what we see with teenage learners is they have this real fear of getting something wrong. And they'd rather not try properly and get it drastically wrong than try quite hard and get it a little bit wrong. Okay, and it's the same way in speaking. They'd much rather just speak with their incredibly hilarious Spanish accent than try and integrate a lot of the pronunciation focus that we might have in class. The same with writing. It's kind of funny to get it completely wrong. And so teenagers suffer from this embarrassment. And that's why they might get it wrong, not because they don't know necessarily, but it's because they just don't want to get it wrong. So they'd rather just write it randomly or 3 or 4 different ways, just in case. You know, one of them might be right. So is this something with students at higher levels that we can fix? Okay, this is my question for now. Can we fix this at secondary levels if it's not been focused on at primary levels? Are these errors so fossilized that students then cannot get over these issues? I would say it will take you longer, because you're not integrating it from a point where they're just starting to learn. Okay, so if it's at the point of learning, of course, this is something which is going to be integrated within their system, within their language system. However, with older learners, they might have had contradictory ideas from different teachers. They might have been told one thing from one teacher and one thing from another. They might, not know how to pronounce something in a certain way. They might pronounce it in 2 different ways, write it in 2 different ways. What we find is there's years of learning, which then we have to try and undo to get them to the same point. However, once we do that, everything we do post that learning point we can integrate into the system so they can also learn with the phonetic system whilst they're learning the new language. Okay, so once we get them to that point, it might take a while, but after that, things should be easier. Okay, so I'm going to introduce now some common issues that teenagers have, and we'll talk about how this can be avoided with focusing on phonics. Some of you might recognize these. So common, so common. Here we have writing, okay? And as we know, here, we can't have double T because it's a magic E word, right? And so when we add the ing, we don't double it because it's not consonant, vowel, consonant. And so this is something very, very simple with the magic E principle and how we add the ing onto the end that we can explain to our students and say, this is the way it is. This is why it's not double T. Okay, very common. We've got with spelt in I don't know how many ways. These are my two favorite ones. So we've got the wit, okay? They know that these combination of letters appears somewhere. Okay, it appears in the word, but we're not really sure where to put those letters, so therefore we'll just put them in a random order. And so what we've got here is poor sound recognition because it's with. You've got the TH. If students don't pronounce that TH at the end of the word, they're not going to be able to identify that you've got the th sound, which are lovely actions in phonics. It's like th, 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 th. And so if they don't pronounce that and recognize that that grapheme relates to, or digraph relates to the th sound that's in with, then they're not going to be able to identify it. So something very simple as this could also kind of rectify this problem. And we've got the same with strength. Okay, so again, letter combinations prove tricky. So we've got the strength. I've seen strength GHTH strangely here. So the strength, the letter combinations can be problematic for students. So I've compiled now, I did a bit of fun research, and I've compiled a list of common errors that I found in writing from teenage learners. And we're going to look at it. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to have a look at the different spelling errors that I've identified. And I want you to think, okay, which of these has been affected by pronunciation and a lack of focus on the phonics and could have been corrected with some phonics focus. Okay, so I'm going to show you the list. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. You don't need to write anything in the chat, just think, okay, of which of these have roots in pronunciation errors. Okay, your 30 seconds starts now. Okay. So we've got a few things here. We've got family. Okay, so we know that the E at the end of the, if it's at the end of the word, it's with a Y in English. Okay, so we can't end with the I. We've got here the 50, which is a very common spelling error. Often we could say it's kind of not realizing that there's a difference between the sound of 5, so with the magic E, and then fifth, so the it and the I, how we've got the different pronunciation there, and how that can't possibly be 5T because you've got the f, and also the magic E doesn't have an effect on the I, so you've got the it and the I. What else? Okay, so our typical here kind of like double letters. So you've got hotter, biggest. We have to double the letters. Why? Because if not, then it looks like it's a magic E word. So it'd be like hoter and biggest. We've got other things here like ball. So the double O is not oo or we can't say bool. Bool, we say ball. The ALL also having some kind of alternative spelling within Jolly Phonics, within Phonics. My favorite here, ice cream. The AISCRUIN, which I think is still one of the funniest. Ice cream is fully decodable. Ice, magic E, cream, fully decodable. Okay, there is no reason why a student who knows the system of phonics cannot spell ice cream. Okay, so a few kind of conclusions to draw from this. In general, our teenage learners have problems with double letters, especially here when they're not sure when to double a letter and how this has an effect on the pronunciation. Missing letters, okay, and we often find missing letters when they are at the end of the word. I often find missing consonants at the end of the words, where students actually don't pronounce this when they're speaking, therefore when they're writing it, they don't have it. So it's also a lack of teachers writing things on the board, a lack of visual support. Extra letters, so we might have like full as well, so knowing that when it's at the end of the word and it's a suffix, you don't put the double L. Applying the L1 spelling rules, okay, so if it's a word that's similar in the L1, for example, ice cream here was spelled exactly as you would write it using the Spanish pronunciation. Wrong order of letters in letter combos like we had in with. And here, tricky words. Okay, so the tricky words can be problematic. And these we just have to work on and make sure that students write these down. Teenagers often have an allergy to writing things down, so we have to make sure that we get students to write things down as much as possible, because the writing also helps us remember. Seeing it helps us remember. Just writing it on the board or correcting it in a piece of writing is not going to solidify it enough for students to get it right the next time. Okay, so how do we work more on spelling with these teenage learners? As we know, a lot of the material for phonics is made for younger learners. Teenagers might think that it's childish. There also might be a reluctance amongst them to change bad habits. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter, you understand what I'm saying, right? However, these students need to go on and do exams. They might need to use it at university. They can't go around pronouncing things correctly and spelling things incorrectly. Okay, so we need to remind them as well that this is not just us correcting them now, it's useful for their futures. Their main goal is communication. And so, like I said, you understand me, you know what I want to say, it's fine, not fine. Teens might find the whole process frustrating. Often when you try to undo bad habits and students think, oh my God, but why did you never tell me this before? It can be very frustrating for them. So again, little by little is the process that we need to go here and understand that it might be very difficult for students to think, oh my gosh, all these years I've not known how to apply this system to the words that I'm saying or the words that I'm writing, and it might take time for them to come around to the idea, as with lots of other things with teenage learners. So how do we focus on this? What are my top tips? You need to make it relevant and meaningful for students. Okay, so not just go through and whatever you want to say, you say or you teach. It has to be relevant for the students that you have in your class and the mistakes that they make. You need to help them see the usefulness of the practice. Okay, so if we practice this, you'll be able to do listening part X much better. Okay, so usefulness of what they've got here. Base your approach on the issues students have. So if they're getting it right, and if you know that their spelling is good in certain ways, but in other ways it's not so good, or the pronunciation is so good, then that's what you focus on. You need to focus on the problems that they have rather than just systematically going through it. Use words which are relevant to students' lives or level. And so again, we might have to adapt, because with the material you have, it's for younger learners. So those words will be for them. However, a lot of them are still very relevant to our higher level learners, but you need to make sure that they're relevant to their lives and levels. And also have realistic goals and expectations of what they can do. Some days they just might not feel like it. And so you have to understand that this is a process that they'll go through, and not everyone will go through the process at the same time. So you have to be patient and have to, you know, little by little remind them of the things, and hopefully then they'll apply that little by little to what they do independently of the teacher. Okay, so we're going to look at some activities now, and then I'll leave a little bit of time at the end for some questions. So we have to demonstrate how this system functions within known language, okay? And as I've said before, with our primary learners, it's all unknown language because it's all at the point of learning. And it's much easier this way because then they apply the system, they learn the language, everything's connected, everything's learned together. However, with this, it's already known language, and language which they've kind of acquired some kind of concept of maybe patterns or things that someone's told them, but maybe not in a regular way or a systematic way. So rather than demonstrating here the system before the acquisition of the language. Okay, so what I'm going to show you are some very, very, very easy ways that we can approach phonics with teenage learners. You don't need a lot of material. You don't need to go out of your way finding different things online. You can integrate this directly into your lessons. And I always say that you don't need to focus on pronunciation to go and find loads of new things. Okay, don't overload your lessons with paper. Just be aware of what your students are producing and how you can help them. You don't need to also be a super expert. Obviously, you need to think about it, but don't be worried about integrating it, okay? Because the worry from the teacher often then trickles down to the students. The teacher then gets more nervous and gets more concerned and then doesn't integrate any pronunciation. And here we have the vicious circle of students at teenage learners not being able to pronounce or spell things. So it's important that we do something, and these are different ways that are very easy to integrate into your lessons. Okay, so one way we can have a look at this, which is I find almost like the light bulb moment in class, where you show students how changing a word can change the pronunciation. So there's three kind of techniques that you can use here, which is like to insert, to delete, or to substitute. And this works really well, for example, with the word formation activities that you have in First Certificate and Advanced and Proficiency. You have a word, it's pronounced in a certain way, it changes, the spelling changes, and it's pronounced in a different way. It's really useful for students to see how it changes depending on the spelling. So you've got here, what's Sam with E? Same. Okay, then we've got the magic E principle. What's clothes without E? Cloths, because again, we haven't got the magic E principle. What's food with T? So substitution. So what we've got in the double O, there are two ways of saying it. So it's oo or Okay, so you've got food, but it's not foot, it's foot. Okay, so here we've got a way that just changing the consonant at the end can also change how we articulate the digraph we've got prior to it. Okay, this one's really, really good for micro listening, and especially if you're training your students to listen for certain words, and really, really useful for any student doing B1, B2, works a treat. And so what you can do here is you can take a text and you can remove words, any text that you might have in your course book, you can use anything, remove certain words which follow certain phonetic patterns. Okay, so you've got here the synthetic phonics. What I've done is I've taken out words which have ow. Okay, ow is one of the ones that also has alternative spellings. So students have to listen and they have to think about what word goes in the gap by listening, and then how to also the ow, whether it's one way of writing it or the other. Okay, so I'm just going to play the audio that I would play to students. And this works very, very well to get students to focus on spelling, but also interpreting what they hear. Okay, so what we've got here is it's following the same patterns. And now I've got 5 minutes left. So we're following the same patterns, and here is the complete text. This works very well on focusing on specific graphemes and then for specific phonemes as well, especially for alternative spellings. Okay, our typical odd one out. So you've got now, no, shower, brown, works in the same way. So some of these here you can say will have the O sound and the others have the ow sound. An odd one out works very well, and you can use this as a filler, as a warmer to your class, or something just to do as you come across problems perhaps in class. Minimal pairs. So minimal pairs here is when there's just one phoneme that's different, and this one often causes problems for students. Ankle, uncle. So you've got the here, and you've got the So just focusing on this and getting students to identify which one's which works very well. Breaking it down. So with words that students come across, we can break this down into the chunks that we would find, the decodable chunks. And so just doing this gets students to identify and pick out which parts they might be getting wrong. And this works well, especially with our letter combinations that students might have problems with. So you've got the lightning here, you've got the lightning, hamburger, birthday, borrow. Okay, so all of these are decodable chunks and get students to see how you break this down when you're trying to spell it or you're trying to pronounce it. Rhyming words, a great way to get students to increase their phonics awareness. So here I've got the sound, okay, which actually has 3 alternative spellings. So you can get students to identify within a text or within a group of words which ones rhyme, okay, or contain this particular sound. So where I've picked out words like her, fur, thirst, nurse, term, okay, all of these students would not pronounce in the same way. Disappearing letters you can use for sight words, so for tricky words, which students often get wrong. But instead of just asking them to spell it out right, what you can do here is get students to complete the word and take out the parts that they often get wrong. So if you've got a writing, for example, write down the words that they get wrong and then remove those letters and get them to put the letters back in. So thinking about those specific combinations or the parts that they get wrong. Okay, so these are 3 which students very often get wrong in writing. So we've got here because, ate, and should. And all I've done here is take out 3 letters in each, and these are letters which students often get wrong. So you're focusing directly on the incorrect part and getting them to think about that, so that hopefully next time when they come to it, they're not going to make the same mistake, or they'll see the mistake there. Okay, I did it. That was quick. All right, so now any questions you might want to ask? Emily, are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. For example, Beatriz Bravo says here, do you think it's a good idea to work with the phonetic chart with teenagers?
With the phonetic chart, I would say that it's you can't introduce it all at once. But what you can do is introduce specific letters. Like I often introduce the schwa with teenage learners because it's something that they, even at higher levels, they don't appreciate. So rather than going through it systematically, what I would do is go through maybe with the phonemes that they have particular problems with and introduce that they might be very close on the chart. And it also really helps you with pronunciation, with articulation, because if they're close on the chart, you can show them, okay, the only difference here is that you round your mouth or that you open your mouth a bit more. And so it helps you to tell them where they're going wrong and how to kind of overcome this. But I would never, with teenage learners, they don't need to learn something else. For example, the individual phonemes of the phonemic chart, but it helps them understand where they're going wrong and how to overcome it, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. We have one more. We have 1 minute. Maybe we can quickly look at it.
Yeah.
Danny says that the phonetic chart deals with pronunciation in the south of England. How to deal with pronunciation differences in the north of England, Scotland, Ireland, USA, Australia, etc.
I get this question the whole time. Ultimately, the phonemic chart is based on received pronunciation, which no one even has anymore. There are certain things in the phonemic chart that even I wouldn't say it in that way. However, what it does is provide a model, and you will, as any speaker of any accent, will still articulate the different phonemes in a different way. And so it doesn't matter if it's not exactly like it is in the dictionary. That phoneme will still relate to one of the sounds in your kind of phonemic bank. So it doesn't matter if it's slightly different the way that your colleague pronounces it, or if you're there is an American one as well. I mean, there is one that's slightly different for American English, but I always say to teachers, teach the accent that you have, because I mean, you are proficient speakers of English, you have your different accents, but there is importantly always a distinction between the way that you pronounce each of these phonemes, and so have your representation of how you pronounce those things in class is what I would say.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have time for time constraints. We don't have time for more questions. So I don't know if you'd like for people to contact you. Yeah.
Yes. So here is my email address. We also have an online platform with lots of webinars and many things to help teachers. Our Instagram and our Facebook. Please contact me if you want the PDF. Okay, so karen@londonschool.com. I'll send you the PDF. I know it's lots of information in 45 minutes. So I'm happy for people to contact me, ask me any questions by email. And if you write any questions in the chat box and also respond to them now, I can write answers to them too. And that's that.
Thank you, Karen. That was brilliant. Lots of fresh ideas, a different point of view for sure that, you know, I personally hadn't thought about it before in terms of when you hear phonics, you always think about young learners, right? So that was definitely very interesting and insightful. Everybody's saying in the chat that they enjoyed it very much. So thank you on attendees' behalf as well. It was great to have you. And just a quick reminder for attendees, you can go and enjoy at the exhibitor stands in your break now, and you have your next session in about 15 minutes. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you. Okay.